So as you probably noticed, as you reflected on your own reading process in the discussion post, there are so many different systems and cognitive processes that your brain is going through while you are reading and while you are trying to comprehend what you read. I love this illustration of this rope with all of these intertwining threads, because I think it really illustrates what an integrated process reading comprehension is. As you can see, sort of at the top here, some of the reading skills that help someone comprehend are related to language comprehension in general. So a fluent reader needs to bring background knowledge, a knowledge of vocabulary, knowledge of language structures, the syntax and semantics, verbal reasoning, and general literacy knowledge, print concepts, genres, etc. So all of that general language background helps someone become a strong reader. But there are also these skills of word recognition. And these are what we're going to touch on in our next section here, our next lecture. So skills like phonological awareness, decoding, sight word recognition. And these word recognition skills are often where kids are really focusing in on in the early grades as they learn to read. And these skills should become increasingly automatic as students become more and more fluent readers. The actual process of decoding words should become like second nature. These language comprehension skills, though, are things that should become increasingly more strategic and are often things that students need lots more practice with, especially as texts get more and more complex. But none of these skills or strands can live in isolation. And in order for someone to become a truly skilled, proficient reader, they need to be able to coordinate all of these different skills together and weave them together into this strand, as illustrated by the rope. So this tells us that reading comprehension is made possible by a number of different factors. Today, in this section, we're going to talk about some of these foundational reading skills, which include phonemic awareness, decoding, sight word knowledge, and reading fluency. Vocabulary knowledge and background knowledge, these are things that we've talked about in previous sessions. And the next week, we're going to focus in on metacognitive strategies as they relate to reading comprehension. So again, in this section, we're really going to focus in on these foundational reading skills. And for those of you who are elementary teachers or special education teachers in particular, these are skills that you are probably deeply familiar with as you're teaching beginning readers. All right. So again, the foundational reading skills that we're going to touch on in particular here are phonemic awareness, phonological awareness, phonics, and orthography. Start with phonemic awareness. So again, for those of you who teach our youngest scholars, you're probably really familiar with phonemic awareness. For those of you who may not be, phonemes refer to the smallest unit of speech, single sounds in speech that correspond to an alphabetic writing system. So the idea, for instance, that the letter B says B, okay, and not even yet being able to connect the letter with the sound, but simply being able to recognize the different sounds that make up language. So when we talk about someone having phonemic awareness, this refers to a person's understanding of how language is composed of individual sounds. Can you hear a word? Can you hear language and separate it into individual sounds? Can you blend individual sounds together to combine into a word? So this level of awareness is sort of the most foundational reading skill. Oftentimes, people tend to mix up or use interchangeably the idea of phonemic awareness and phonological awareness. But again, whereas phonemic awareness really refers to just the understanding of the sounds of a word or sounds of language, phonological awareness refers to an understanding that words are composed of a variety of sound units, including syllables, rhymes, consonant blends, etc. And so these are about combinations of sounds as opposed to just individual sounds. So think for a moment about a couple of tasks that young students might do, or students who are just learning to read in English might do, and think about whether they're phonemic awareness or phonological awareness. So the first one, matching rhyming words. Second, identifying the middle sound in a word. Third, orally segmenting a word into syllables. So being able to take a word like happiness and identify that there are 3 syllables. Happiness. Okay? So what do you think? Are those phonemic awareness or phonological awareness? If you said they're generally phonological awareness, you're right, because these are all about how variety of sound units fit together to form words, as opposed to individual specific sounds. Okay, so at this point, I actually want you to stop the recording, pause it, and go into the online module folder and open up the document called Phonological Skills Test. Okay, this is a test that is given to typically young students to assess their phonological skills development, their phonological awareness. And there are a number of different little quizzes or tasks that a teacher would go through with a student as they're administering this test. So I want you to read through it for yourself, and if you can, try to give a couple of the sections within the test to someone around you, friend, roommate, colleague, partner, etc. And see how it feels. See what you're actually trying to learn about a reader as you give this test. Some of the tasks will call for students to use counters. Instead of using counters, you can easily represent sounds by holding up a finger or drawing dots on a piece of paper to represent the number of sounds. And so as you read through this and practice giving it to a friend, think here about how the skills assessed within this test connect to reading comprehension, connect to writing, sort of bigger literacy skills. And how might some of these skills be particularly difficult for English language learners? So again, pause the recording here and then come back to the lecture once you've finished going through this test. So as you probably noticed from the phonological awareness skills test, being able to distinguish sounds or combinations of sounds in English can be particularly difficult for English language learners. Partly because there are different sounds from language to language. Some sounds don't exist in Spanish that exist in English, for instance. However, even though that's the case, you can still, again, make predictions about a student's success and transfer some skills from the native language to English. So phonemic awareness in Spanish, for example, can predict later word recognition and reading success in English. And the more phonemic awareness training a student gets, this will improve their later reading performance. So phonemic awareness training and getting accustomed to the sounds in the English language can help improve reading success down the line. As you read in some of your readings for this week, speech perception is different across languages. It can be really difficult for a student to perceive sounds in English that don't exist in their native language, or to interpret accented sounds or accented speech. And that in turn can influence how teachers perceive an ELL student's phonemic awareness. Okay, so a teacher might assume that an ELL student's phonemic awareness is low or is problematic, when in reality they may have strong phonemic awareness, especially in their native language, but may be having difficulty perceiving some of the sounds that are different across languages. However, that doesn't mean that an ELL is ultimately going to be held back or struggle with reading comprehension, because often some of their metalinguistic abilities and the other language strategies that they have can compensate for these challenges or these difficulties in transferring sounds from one language to another. So ultimately, while phonemic awareness training is important and can be helpful for English language learners, the National Literacy Panel has said that when English language learners struggle with phonemic awareness, it doesn't necessarily place them at greater risk for reading failure. So that's an interesting distinction to make. So let's talk now about phonics in orthography. So phonics is related to phonological awareness and phonemic awareness, but is distinct. So phonics refers to the relationship between letters and sounds. Okay, and then orthography is the actual writing system of a language. And that represents the spoken language in written form. Okay, so how do you take oral language, put it down on paper so that someone can interpret it? Helpful tip to remember the difference between phonics and phonemic awareness is that phonemic awareness works in the dark. It's all about sounds, but you need to turn on the lights for phonics. Okay, for phonics, you need to be able to recognize letters, combinations of letters, and think about the sounds that they make. So you have to see and hear. Okay. So there's definitely been a lot of research on phonics in English language learners. And one important finding, and this should sound familiar and intuitive to you now, is that research shows ELLs who can apply the alphabetic principle in their native language can transfer that understanding to their second language. Okay, now that's certainly true for English language learners who have a native language that has the alphabetic principle, that follows the alphabetic principle like English, so that individual graphemes or letters represent sounds. That's different in a language like Mandarin or Japanese, for example, that doesn't follow the alphabetic principle in the same way. So this transfer is certainly more effective for English language learners whose native language is based on the Roman alphabet, shares the same alphabet as English. There may be articulation differences. Okay, again, sounds may be different. Letters may have different sounds from one language to another. So teachers may sometimes confuse decoding errors with pronunciation differences. Okay, they may think that because a student is pronouncing a sound differently, that means that they are unable to decode, when in fact they just need some explicit instruction in how sounds and letter sounds are different between their native language and English. When young students, beginning readers in early elementary grades, are learning how to read, they're taught to use three main cueing systems when they decode words. And again, if you're a lower elementary teacher, you're probably really familiar with this. You probably taught lessons on it. So the systems they use are meaning, visual, and syntax. So young students are often taught to ask themselves the questions as they read. Does it make sense? Does it look right? And does it sound right? Okay. Now think about this for an English language learner. What cueing systems do you think a level 1 and level 2 ELL is most likely to rely on out of these three? Typically, our lowest level English language learners are really relying on this visual cueing system. They're looking at the letters on the paper, using their knowledge of the sounds they make, and trying to see if it looks right. Okay? But often where they struggle are in these other two. Okay? struggle with the meaning system. Okay, they struggle to answer, does it make sense? Because sometimes they're lacking the vocabulary in English and they're not able to really tell if what they've read made sense, if they don't know a number of the vocabulary words in the text. They also struggle with this idea of syntax. Does it sound right? Does what I read sound like normal structure, normal language in English? If they're not familiar with the typical syntactic structures of English, they're not going to be able to answer that question. Okay. So what kinds of implications does that have for their reading comprehension? Ultimately, a student may become really, really good at decoding based on this visual cueing system. Okay, based on being able to see the letters on the page, and say what they see. But they may really struggle with comprehension because they're not able to use the meaning or the syntax cueing systems. Another thing that is challenging for English language learners are differences in orthographies from one language to another. The orthographies being the spelling systems of a language. So while some languages, for example, English, German, Spanish, read left to right, other languages may read right to left or top to bottom. You can imagine that's a challenging change to make for a student. You also have languages that where characters or symbols or graphemes mean different things, or have different levels of meaning. So you can have languages that are logographic, syllabic, or alphabetic. English is an alphabetic language. There are individual letters or graphemes that correspond with sounds, and you put those letters together to make words, to make meaning. Okay, so other languages like that would be Spanish, German, even Hebrew. Okay. Syllabic languages have graphemes or symbols that represent syllables, combinations of sounds, and logographic languages would be languages, for example, like Chinese, like Mandarin, where characters represent symbols or represent words or units of meaning. So there can be challenges of going from one of, a language that is logographic to a language that is alphabetic, or vice versa. Even within alphabetic languages, there are challenging differences. And one of those differences is whether the languages have deep or shallow orthography. So let me tell you what that means. Okay. So in all languages that have alphabetic writing systems, you have phoneme-grapheme correspondence. So again, this idea that a symbol or a letter, a grapheme, corresponds with a sound. Okay. Some languages have what we call shallow orthographies. Those are spelling systems, alphabetic systems, where there are very few sounds that correspond with each letter, with each grapheme. Typically, in a language like Spanish, there's pretty much one letter, one sound. And you really say the word like you see it. So here's some examples. Casa, playa, mapa, abuela, arreglar, copiar. You read them like you see them. They're not tricky silent letters. There are not different combinations of letters that could make different sounds in different circumstances. It's pretty straightforward. I am not a German speaker, so I'm not going to attempt to read these German words, but the idea is similar. Very transparent, very shallow orthography. Not a lot of ways to read what you see on the paper. Okay. But then we have languages that have deep orthographies. And English is a language that has a very deep orthography. And that means that different graphemes, different letters can have, or different sounds, can have many different types of spellings. Okay, so English is full of these. So think about the f sound. It can be spelled with an F, with a PH, with a double F, with a GH. Okay, all the same sound, different spellings. The sound A, the long A sound, can be spelled EI, A with an E at the end, EA, AI. Okay. And look at these three words. Have the same spelling pattern, very, very similar. Consonant, vowel, consonant combination. And listen to the difference in the sound of the U in each of these words. But, cut, put. Okay, but and cut are similar, but put, the U has a slightly different sound. So this is a true deep orthography. Very complex. I want you to try a quick exercise. This will really help you see how deep English orthography is. Okay, so here are the two exercises I want you to do. Pause the recording in a moment, and on a piece of paper nearby, jot down 6 words, at least 6 words you can come up with, in which the letters O-U-G-H represent different sounds. Okay, so here's 2 examples. In the word hiccup, O-U-G-H makes a sound like up. But in the word Poughkeepsie, it makes a sound like See if you can think of 6 words where this sound is used differently. Then I want you to think about how many different ways in English you can spell the sound sh. Okay, so pause the recording and try to answer these questions on a piece of paper. When you're ready, go to the next slide. How many were you able to come up with? Here are about 7 different words in which the letters O-U-G-H represent different sounds. So we had hiccup and Poughkeepsie. Here's another word though, bough. Okay, like the bough of a tree. There's bought, in which O-U-G-H makes aw. There's though, where it says o. There's through, where it says oo. And there's rough, where it says uff. And there's probably others that you came up with too. How many words were you able to get where you spell the sound sh differently? Here are a number of them. You see the SH, SU, CE, SSU, TI, SCH, okay, CI, SEO, SCI, CH, CHS. There's so many different letter combinations for this one particular sound. Okay, these are perfect examples of why English is such a deep, challenging orthography. It's easy to think that an alphabetic orthography and alphabetic system just has simple sound to symbol mapping. Okay, so you memorize the different letter combinations that make particular sound, and that's it. Okay, but sometimes our orthography preserves meaning connections over sound connections. So, for example, think about the word sign. We don't pronounce the G in sign. So is it just useless? Is it meaningless? Is it one of those tricky silent letters that just annoys the heck out of us? It doesn't map onto a sound. So maybe that's one way to look at it. But take a look at the word signature. When we look at sign and signature together, we can see that the English orthography can show us a meaning connection between those 2 words. Okay, we can see that they come from the same root. They share a similar meaning. And that G becomes important in the word signature. And we wouldn't be able to see that connection if the silent G didn't exist in sign. This can also explain some other silent letters, like the P in the word pterodactyl. In Greek, P-T-E-R, ter, means wing. We also see it in helicopter. So if that P didn't exist in pterodactyl, we wouldn't as clearly see the Greek root and the meaning behind that etymology. An allomorph is a different sound on a morpheme, depending on the sound of the word or the stem which it is attached to. So for example, when you add an S to make a word in English plural, it has different sounds or different allomorphs even though it's spelled the same. So listen to these 3 plural nouns and how different that S sounds. Cats, dogs, dishes. So in cats, the S says S. In dogs, it's more of a Z sound. And in dishes, it's an is sound. You add that E in there and it makes an is sound. So even though it's spelled similarly, it's spelled the same, the sound becomes different. So another thing that can make English a difficult orthography, or deep orthography, is that it borrows a lot of words from other languages. And when it borrows those words, it maintains the spellings of the loan words. Think about words like rendezvous, chutzpah, apartheid. Okay, these are all words borrowed from different languages, and they don't really follow English spelling rules. They follow the rules of the native language that they're from. So this is just another reason why English is a deep and difficult orthography to master. Okay, so you're at the end of the second lecture, and you're ready for the second discussion. I want you to reflect on what we learned in this lecture, what you've seen in your classroom, and what you've read in this week's readings, and answer the following questions. What makes English orthography hard for English language learners? How have you seen this play out in your class? What can you do to help English language learners read English orthography well? Despite all these challenges, despite how difficult English is, what can you do in your instruction to support ELLs in overcoming these challenges? Okay, so stop here, go ahead, post your original response in the discussion board, and then be sure to respond to a colleague as well.